been offered a juicy roll, and he gave it to me to read. And I simply read it and handed it back to him. And he said, yeah, I'm not going to do it. I wouldn't want the kids to see me in this. That's how you reconcile it. So it's a question that has never had any bearing in my own life, because for me, music, painting, writing has always been my best way to enlarge my own faith and to express it in my own work. And I think it's one of Satan's greater triumphs has been to make art suspect. Now, of course, one of the problems is that many great artists are terrible people. It really used to make my mother very unhappy that her beloved Wagner was such a nasty man. And I think what happens here is that the subconscious mind of the artist is always religious, no matter what the conscious mind says. That the subconscious, the part of one that creates, to create is a religious activity. It is an incarnational activity. Now, many terrible things are written, awful things are written that have nothing to do with God and God's love. Wherever there is good, there is always the mimic coming in and trying to do bad stuff. But that doesn't make the original good any less good.
Do you think that you or your readers would be better off if your rotten teachers and your good ones?
My mother used to apologize for my strange and unhappy childhood. I always say, "Mother, look at all the work I've got. Look at all the stories. Don't worry about it." I was once asked by a group of middle school teachers what my middle school teachers did that was the best for me in enlarging my creativity, and I told them about the teachers who thought I was stupid, and I said, "I don't really suggest this as a way to teach, but it worked for me." Where did I get my idea for the Austen series and for the Wrinkle in Time series? Okay, the Austen series simply comes out of my own family life. The Austens do all the things that we did. They live in the house that we lived in. They took the same camping trip we took. They moved back to New York, and we moved back to New York. My idea for A Wrinkle in Time came, we had been living up in Northwest Connecticut. My husband had left the theater, and because he thought the kids needed to, it really wasn't fair to have more than one child with both parents in totally precarious professions. So we moved to the country, and the church in the village was the Congregational church, and we were very deeply involved in that church. And it's still my church. That's the church where my letter is. But I learned that as a storyteller, I need symbol and sacrament. And in that church, there were no symbols of any kind allowed. There's now a nice plain wooden cross, but that would have been taboo. When the minister said, "Let us pray," we bowed our heads ever so slightly, because to do more would have been to capitulate to Rome. And then, here we come to the German theologians I mentioned so briefly. I felt that I couldn't believe all the dogma I was being fed. And so my congregational minister friends gave me German theologians to read. And I would read these German theologians, and I would sigh, and I think, if I've got to believe all of this stuff, it's not for me. I've subsequently learned there's one really valid use for German theologians: insomnia. And those long Germanic sentences are going to bore you to sleep. But I was thinking, I was asking all the big questions. What is life about? Why are we here? Who are we? Is there really a God? Does God care? Is God really a God of love? I was asking all those questions that you should be asking, and that we should never stop asking. And that was where A Wrinkle in Time came from, was my rebuttal to the German theologians. I was trying to write about a universe in which I could believe. A universe created by a God of love, who looked at everything that he'd made and said, "Wow, it's wonderful, it's good." Do you have to suffer to become a good writer? Well, it helps. I sometimes teach a class of 11th and 12th graders in techniques of fiction, and I mentioned that most of my best work has come out of pain. And one of my students went out looking for pain. I said, don't do that. Clinically, that's known as masochism. You don't have to look for it, just wait, it'll come. Untouched lives aren't very exciting. Our capacity for joy and our capacity for grief are identical. If we have never grieved much, we will never rejoice much. But don't worry about it, just live long enough. I don't think there's anything children can't understand. I think there's a lot of stuff grown-ups can't understand. But I don't think there's anything children can't understand. When I was writing A Wrinkle in Time, my children were 7, 10, and 12, and I was reading them at night what I'd written during the day. And they'd say, oh, Mother, go back to the typewriter. And the publishers who would reject this book kept saying, who is this book for? Is this book for children? Is this book for grown-ups? I say, it's for people. Do people read books? But the assumption was that it was too difficult for children. Well, I now know that when I have something to write that is too difficult for grown-ups, I will use a young protagonist who will market it as a children's book. And that's really true. No, my frustrations were not that I didn't want to write, but that when I had my kids, I couldn't find time to write. And believe me, that was frustrating. Sorry, what do I think of what?
What do you think helped you most to be a great author?
What helped me most to be a storyteller? I grew up in a house that was full of books. My parents read. My parents read aloud to each other every night of their lives. They went all through Dumas. And so I grew up in an atmosphere where reading and writing was simply taken for granted. I think I was very lucky in going to a women's college, because what there was to do, we did. If there was to be a president, it was one of us. So we left college with the idea that there was no door closed to us. And I think that was also important. But the things that have helped me in being a writer have sometimes not been good things. When A Wrinkle in Time was being rejected and rejected and rejected for 2.5 years, it was stubbornness that kept me going. That's how I knew that Mrs. Whatsit would give Meg her faults. It was my faults sometimes that kept me going. So it's almost everything that happens in your life in one way is going to affect what you do, whether it's writing or painting or being a lawyer or whatever, a doctor. Feel you have to do it every day, and don't feel you have to be spiritual. When something spiritual comes out in my notebook, it's almost by chance. A lot of it is junk. If I take it out in the journal, I don't take it out on the family. When I'm flying and things go wrong, as they always do at O'Hare, I chat to myself in the journal. I say, well, here we are at O'Hare, it's chaos again as usual. I've never taken a journal workshop because I'm sure I'd find out I've done it wrong all these years. But I think a journal should be whatever you want it to be, whatever fills your particular need. And mine are just a compendium. I copy out things I like and forget which journal they're in, but simply having copied them is a way of remembering them. Another reason for writing a journal is that what you write down, you tend not to forget. So in a sense, writing a journal, you're writing your own story, and you're not losing any part of yourself. There's so many grown-ups who walk around in a little isolated chronological slot, and I don't want to lose any of myself. I don't want to lose my child self, my adolescent self, my young woman self. I want it all to be there. And writing a journal is one of the best ways I know of keeping it.
You referred to the last temptation of Christ. I wondered, one, if you see it, and two, what your assessment is
I haven't seen it, and I don't particularly want to, simply because I hear it's not terribly good. However, we are taught that Jesus was tempted exactly like all of us, and probably new temptations I've never even thought of. But he didn't fall for the temptations. He rejected them all. That's perfectly sound theology. The movie hasn't happened to hit my neighborhood. If it does, if I'm not busy, I might go. It's not on my prime list. If you haven't seen Babette's Feast, that's marvelous theology.
I wonder if you could say just a tiny bit about your spiritual journey so that some people who may not understand specifically Christian as opposed to religious or just believing God, so that as you are expressing how it's deep, meaningful, and Jesus is the focus. And you gave a little autobiography of your earthly life, what has been your spiritual journey.
My spiritual journey has been a very slow, very back and forwards one, 2 steps forward and 3 steps back sometimes. I am and have been for many years, for the academic year, back with the Episcopal Church, the church of my birth. And it is a church that nourishes me. But I also love my little white congregational church in Connecticut, which nourishes me in a different way. I don't think we can be Christians in isolation. I think we need to be part of a community. But I really don't think Jesus had denominations in mind. I hardly see him gathering the disciples around and saying, "Now, guys, John, of course, you're perfect for the Episcopalians. Peter, I think you might start the Methodists. Now, Andrew, what about the Presbyterians? And Matthew, what about the Baptists? They're awfully money-oriented. That's not what it was meant to be. We are not meant to be a broken body, which we are. We're meant to be one. And I think one of the ways we will become one body, that Christian unity will happen, is by Christians of all traditions meeting and talking together. Because what joins us is central, and that's Jesus, Christ, the risen Lord. What separates us is peripheral. Whether we kneel or whether we bow our heads, or what, that's peripheral. That's simply a manner of expressing that central thing which is common to all of us. We tend to forget the common thing and argue horribly about the peripheral things. That's one of Satan's major triumphs, is to split us, divide us, make us hung up on little things that aren't very important. I was not too long ago at Berea College in Kentucky, and during the question and answer session, one of the students said to me very earnestly, "What do you think about creationism versus evolution?" And I just laughed and said, I can't get very excited about it. And there's only one question worth asking, and that question is, did God make it? Did God do it? If the answer is yes, why get so excited about how? That's peripheral. As far as I can see, some form of evolution seems by far the most likely explanation. But if I should find out tomorrow that it's something quite different, that would have no effect on my faith, because that's peripheral. My faith is based on the central thing that we are God's. God made us. And God made all that is and looked at it and said it's good. So the spiritual journey is always a continuing journey. I don't much like any denomination. I think they're a terrible mistake. I like Christians getting together and talking. I like us sharing food together. The dinner table is for me a very sacramental part of the day. When we sit down and I light the candles and we hold hands and say grace and then talk. That's community, that's Christian community. We may be at the table 8 people representing 8 different ways of being Christian, but we are there, we are unified. So my spiritual journey is a continuing journey. I'm still on the way. I'm moving, but I'm on the way.
I was really touched in Love Letters by Charlotte's need for a point of reference. And I was wondering, is there something in your life, something that you wrote about that?
I think we all need a point of reference. A point of reference that will tell us where we are and where we're going. Charlotte uses the example, or I guess Violet, her mother-in-law, uses the example of being in a train with another train on the other track, and we don't take trains that often nowadays, But if one of the trains begins to move, you don't know whether it's yours or whether it's the other one, unless you see somebody standing on the platform and that person is your point of reference. And all through my life, my heroes and heroines have been my points of reference. People I don't want to let down. I suppose the only common denominator is God, the Creator. And that would be the common denominator among Christians and Buddhists and Hindus and Jews and Muslims, that we are made by a loving Creator, and that is the common thing. I certainly cannot wipe out 2/3 of the world's population, as some people tend to do. God made everything and everybody. For me, because the Christian tradition is in my bones and in my bloodstream, that is the way for me. But I can't say that a devout Buddhist hasn't got an equally valid way to go for that person. I don't know. And there are a lot of questions. I have a lot of questions that don't have answers, and I think we tend to make too many answers. A lot of things should be left in the realm of questions. I've been writing for about 15 years to a prisoner who started out in Jackson, Michigan in a high-security prison, was in for murder, which he did not commit. And this is through a program for the American PEN, whereby prisoners could work with a writer towards rehabilitation, prisoners who wanted to write. And our correspondence has been deepening constantly, often more about religion than it is about writing. But for him, the people that he encountered in prison who were Christian